The lecture hall was a coliseum of intellect, its tiered seats filled with students scribbling notes under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. At the front, Professor Harold Grayson, a man whose reputation for brilliance was matched only by his disdain for imperfection, paced before a chalkboard scrawled with equations so intricate they seemed to taunt the room. In the third row, Aisha Thompson sat, her pencil still, her eyes fixed on the board. She was the only black student in the advanced calculus course at Westbridge University, a prestigious institution known for chewing up and spitting out anyone who didn't fit its mold. Aisha, with her braided hair and thrift store sweater, felt the weight of every stare, every whispered doubt. But she wasn't here to blend in. She was here to conquer. It started subtly, the way Grayson's eyes lingered on her when he posed a question to the class, his tone sharp as a blade. "Miss Thompson," he'd say, drawing out her name like a challenge, "perhaps you'd care to enlighten us?" The room would hush, waiting for her to falter. She never did. Her answers were crisp, precise, delivered with a quiet confidence that seemed to irritate him more each day. Aisha had grown up solving equations on the back of diner placemats while her mother worked double shifts. Math was her sanctuary, a language where she could speak without fear of being misunderstood. But Grayson, and a few others like him, saw her as an anomaly, a glitch in their pristine academic world. The whispers grew louder as the semester progressed. "She's probably cheating," one student muttered. "Affirmative action," another sneered. Aisha heard it all, but she kept her head down, her focus razor-sharp. She wasn't here for their approval. She was here for her mother, who'd sacrificed everything to send her to Westbridge, and for herself, to prove she belonged. Still, the pressure was relentless. Grayson, along with Professor Elaine Whitaker, another titan of the math department, seemed determined to break her. They'd call on her for the hardest problems, their smiles thin and predatory, waiting for her to crack. But Aisha didn't crack. She solved every equation, her voice steady, her logic flawless. One day, Grayson upped the ante. He strode into class with a gleam in his eye, holding a single sheet of paper. "Today," he announced, "we have a special challenge. A problem so complex it stumped even my colleagues at MIT." The room buzzed with nervous energy. He turned to Aisha, his smile almost cruel. "Miss Thompson, why don't you take the first crack at it? Unless, of course, you'd prefer to pass." The implication was clear, she was out of her depth, and he wanted the whole class to see it. Aisha's heart pounded, but not from fear. She recognized the problem immediately, a notorious partial differential equation that had baffled mathematicians for decades. She'd stumbled across it in an old library book, spending sleepless nights unraveling its secrets. She stood, walked to the board, and began writing. The room was silent, save for the scratch of her chalk. Line by line, she built her solution, her movements deliberate, her mind a symphony of logic. When she finished, she stepped back, the board a masterpiece of clarity. Grayson's face was unreadable, but Whitaker, sitting in the back, looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "Impressive," Grayson said finally, his voice tight. "But let's see if you can defend it." For the next hour, he and Whitaker peppered her with questions, each one sharper than the last, probing for weaknesses. Aisha answered every one, her voice never wavering. The other students watched, wide-eyed, as the professor's confidence began to crack. By the end, Grayson was silent, his arms crossed, his face a mask of grudging respect. Aisha returned to her seat, her heart racing, not with triumph, but with something deeper, a quiet fire that burned for every kid like her who'd ever been underestimated. Word of Aisha's performance spread like wildfire. Students who'd once ignored her now nodded in the halls. But the professors weren't done. Grayson and Whitaker, stung by their public defeat, devised a new plan. They invited Aisha to a special seminar, a closed-door session with the department's elite. She arrived to find a room of 10 professors, all white, all men except for Whitaker, their expressions ranging from skeptical to outright hostile. The problem they presented was even more daunting than the last, a beast of an equation that required not just skill but intuition, creativity, and nerve. "We're curious, Miss Thompson," Whitaker said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "to see if your talent holds up under scrutiny." Aisha felt the weight of their stares, the unspoken assumption that she was a fluke, a fraud. She thought of her mother, who'd once told her, "They'll try to dim your light, baby, but you shine anyway." She took a deep breath and began. The professors watched, some scribbling notes, others leaning forward as if waiting for her to stumble. But Aisha didn't stumble. She wove through the problem with a grace that left them speechless, her solution not just correct but elegant, a thing of beauty. When she finished, the room was silent. Then, unexpectedly, Professor Nguyen, a quiet man who'd said little, began to clap. Slowly, others joined, until the room was filled with reluctant applause. But the turning point came not from the professors, but from someone else entirely. As Aisha gathered her things to leave, a janitor named Marcus, who'd been cleaning the hallway outside, poked his head in. He was an older black man, his face lined with years of hard work, but his eyes were bright with pride. "I heard you in there," he said softly. "You're something special, girl." Aisha smiled, embarrassed, but he wasn't done. "I got a grandson, 'bout your age. Loves math, but his teachers don't see him. You mind talkin' to him sometime? Show him what's possible." Aisha's throat tightened. She nodded, unable to speak. That night, she met Marcus's grandson, Jamal, a shy 15-year-old who lit up when she showed him a calculus trick she'd learned. They sat in a diner, much like the one where Aisha had grown up, and she saw herself in his wide-eyed wonder. She didn't just teach him math, she told him her story, the doubts, the sneers, the triumphs. "Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do," she said. "You're already enough." The next day, Aisha returned to class, but something had shifted. Grayson and Whitaker were quieter, their questions less barbed. Word of her seminar performance had reached the dean, who called her in to congratulate her personally. But the real change came in the weeks that followed. Aisha started a free tutoring program for local high school students, focusing on kids from underserved communities. Jamal was her first student, but soon others joined, drawn by her patience and belief in them. She didn't just teach calculus, she taught them to believe in their own brilliance. One evening, as Aisha was packing up after a tutoring session, Marcus stopped by with a small, wrapped box. "From me and Jamal," he said. Inside was a simple silver pendant shaped like an integral sign, a symbol of the math that had changed her life. Aisha's eyes filled with tears. She realized then that her victories weren't just for her, they were for Jamal, for Marcus, for every kid who'd been told they didn't belong. She hugged Marcus, whispering, "Thank you." The semester ended with Aisha earning the highest grade in the class, but that wasn't the point. The point was the email she got from Grayson, a single line, "You've taught me something, Miss Thompson. Keep shining." It wasn't an apology, but it was enough. Aisha framed it, not for pride, but as a reminder that even the hardest hearts could soften. Years later, Aisha stood at the front of her own classroom, now a professor at Westbridge. On her desk sat the integral pendant, a quiet tribute to the journey that had brought her here. Her students, a diverse mix of faces, looked to her not just for math, but for hope. She thought of Marcus, now retired, and Jamal, now in college, studying engineering. She thought of her mother, who'd cried when Aisha showed her the pendant. And she thought of the girl she'd been, sitting in that lecture hall, refusing to break. Aisha's story spread beyond Westbridge, inspiring students across the country. It wasn't just about calculus. It was about the power of seeing someone, truly seeing them, and believing they could soar. Her tutoring program grew, funded by grants she'd earned through her own brilliance. And every time a student doubted themselves, she'd tell them, "You're already enough." Because she knew, better than anyone, that kindness, selflessness, and the stubborn belief in humanity could change the world, one equation, one heart at a time.